There comes a time in life when you realize that growing older isn't always about wrinkles or gray hair. Sometimes it's about hesitation. It's about sitting behind the steering wheel of your car and suddenly feeling unsure of roads you've driven for decades. That was me. I was in my 60s, living alone in Ohio, trying my best to remain independent. For most of my life, I had been the person everyone depended on. I drove my son to school every morning. I sat in crowded parking lots waiting for football practice to end. I made late-night trips to pharmacies when he was sick. Driving had always been second nature to me, until one day it wasn't. Nothing dramatic happened, no accident, no medical emergency, just a quiet loss of confidence. The highways seemed busier than before. Night driving made me nervous. Long distances left me exhausted, so I started asking for help once in a while, only when I truly needed it. My son and his wife lived about 20 minutes away. Whenever I had a doctor's appointment across town or needed groceries from a larger store, I would call and ask if they were available. At first, my daughter-in-law seemed happy to help. "Of course," she'd say. "No problem." And I believed her. I was grateful every single time. I never treated it like an obligation. Whenever she drove me somewhere, I would buy her lunch. I'd fill her gas tank. Sometimes I'd slip a small gift card into her purse without saying anything. I wanted her to know I appreciated her, because appreciation matters. At least it always mattered to me. For a while, everything seemed fine, but little by little, something began to change. At first, it was so subtle that I almost missed it. A sigh when I called, a long pause before answering, an excuse about being busy. Then came the comments, small comments, the kind that could easily be dismissed if you wanted to avoid conflict. "You should probably move closer to town. That doctor's office is really far. I have a lot going on, you know." Every time I heard those words, I told myself not to be sensitive. I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe life was difficult. I kept making excuses for her because that's what mothers do. We protect people, even when they're hurting us. Months passed. The rides became less frequent. The warmth disappeared. I noticed she no longer spoke to me the way she used to. Her smiles felt forced. Her patience felt borrowed. And every time I asked for help, I felt guilty before I even picked up the phone. That feeling stayed with me. It settled into my chest like a stone. One afternoon, our family gathered for a birthday celebration at a local restaurant. Nothing fancy, just family, laughter, cake, the usual conversations. I remember watching everyone around the table, my son laughing, the grandchildren playing, the smell of food drifting through the room. For a moment, everything felt normal, comforting, safe. Then someone asked how my recent doctor's appointment had gone. I mentioned that my daughter-in-law had driven me there. I smiled and thanked her in front of everyone. I thought I was being kind. I thought I was showing appreciation. Instead, she looked at me and laughed. Not a warm laugh, not a playful one, a cold laugh. The room became strangely quiet. Then she said the words that I still hear in my mind. "I'm not your chauffeur." Just like that. 4 words, 4 simple words. But they landed like a slap. The table went silent. I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For a second, I thought maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe she was joking. Maybe everyone would laugh and move on. But nobody laughed. Nobody said anything. My son stared at his plate. The grandchildren kept eating, and I sat there frozen, embarrassed, humiliated, small. I forced a smile because I didn't know what else to do. What was I supposed to say? Argue? Cry? Defend myself? So I did what I'd done my entire life. I swallowed the hurt. I changed the subject. I pretended everything was fine. But inside, something had cracked. The drive home that evening felt longer than usual. I stared out the passenger window while the Ohio sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Beautiful colors. A beautiful evening. Yet all I could hear were those words. "I'm not your chauffeur." Over and over, like an echo. I thought about all the years I had spent helping others without keeping score, all the sacrifices, all the rides, all the times I had shown up because someone needed me, And suddenly I found myself asking a question I never thought I'd ask. When did I become a burden? When did helping me become something to resent? That night, I sat alone in my living room long after midnight. The house was quiet, too quiet. And for the first time, I began wondering whether that comment was really about a car ride at all. Because sometimes a single sentence reveals a truth that's been hiding for years. And deep down, I was beginning to fear that what I heard that day was only the beginning. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. "I'm not your chauffeur." 4 words, simple words. But sometimes the smallest sentences carry the biggest truths. For days, they followed me everywhere. While I washed dishes, while I folded laundry, while I sat alone in my living room watching the evening news, the words lingered. And the more I replayed them in my mind, the more I began to see things I had ignored for years. It's funny how pain can sharpen your vision. Suddenly, memories I had brushed aside started returning one by one. Little moments, tiny cuts, things that seemed insignificant at the time. But when placed together, they formed a picture I could no longer ignore. I remembered family dinners where everyone discussed plans for holidays while I sat quietly at the end of the table. Then, days later, I would discover details nobody had bothered to tell me. I remembered finding photos online of birthday celebrations I hadn't been invited to, not because they forgot, because nobody thought to include me. I remembered hearing about weekend trips after they had already happened. I would smile and say, "Looks like you all had fun." And they would answer, "Oh, we didn't think you'd want to go." Every time I accepted the explanation, I wanted to believe the best. That's what mothers do. We make excuses for the people we love, even when those excuses hurt. As the weeks passed, I started paying attention, really paying attention, not with anger, not with bitterness, just honesty. For the first time in a long time, I stopped making excuses. And what I saw broke my heart. Whenever I called my son, our conversations felt rushed, as though he were checking a task off a list. "Everything okay? Need anything? All right, Mom, I've got to go." The calls lasted minutes, sometimes less. Yet I remembered a little boy who once talked to me for hours. A little boy who used to sit beside me on the couch and tell me everything. His dreams, his fears, his plans. Back then, I was his safe place. Now I felt like an interruption. I thought to myself, when exactly did that happen? When did I stop being someone he wanted to talk to? The hardest realization wasn't that my daughter-in-law seemed annoyed by me. The hardest realization was that my son rarely defended me. That night at the restaurant replayed in my mind again and again. I could still see him sitting there, silent, looking down at his plate, not saying a word. Not because he agreed, at least I hoped not, but because speaking up would have been uncomfortable. And apparently, my embarrassment was easier to tolerate than his discomfort. That realization stayed with me. Some nights I sat awake long after midnight thinking about it. The house would be dark and quiet, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the clock ticking on the wall, and there I would sit, staring into the darkness, remembering. I remembered being 23 years old and working 2 jobs after my husband left. I remembered clipping coupons at the kitchen table, skipping meals so there would be enough food for my son. I remembered school fundraisers, doctor visits, baseball games, parent-teacher conferences, countless sacrifices, thousands of little acts of love. Not because I expected repayment. Children don't owe their parents a debt. I never believed that. But I did believe that love mattered, that kindness mattered, that respect mattered. And lately, I wasn't feeling any of those things. One afternoon, I stopped by their house with homemade soup. My grandson had been sick earlier that week. I thought the family might enjoy it. When I arrived, several cars were parked outside. I could hear laughter from inside. For a moment, I smiled. Family gathering. How nice. Then I walked through the front door. The room became awkwardly quiet. Not because they were happy to see me, because they weren't expecting me. I quickly realized everyone had been invited except me. My son's cousins, friends, neighbors, even relatives from another town. Everyone seemed to know about the gathering, everyone except me. My daughter-in-law forced a smile. "Oh," she said, "we didn't know if you'd want to come." The same excuse. Again, I smiled back. I acted like it didn't bother me, but inside, something shifted. Because for the first time, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being overly sensitive. The pattern was real, the exclusion was real, and the loneliness was real. That evening, I drove home feeling strangely calm, not happy, not angry, just clear. For years, I had been chasing little scraps of belonging, trying to convince myself that things were fine, trying to hold on to the image of the family I thought we were. But reality was standing right in front of me, and reality doesn't disappear simply because we look away. As I sat on my porch watching the sun sink below the Ohio horizon, I found myself asking a difficult question. If they truly saw me as a burden, if my presence felt like an obligation, then why was I still arranging my future around people who barely made room for me in their present? The answer didn't come immediately, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to ask the question, and deep down, I had a feeling that the answer would change everything. After that evening on my porch, something inside me became very quiet, not broken, not angry, just quiet. For months, I had been carrying sadness like a heavy suitcase. Everywhere I went, it followed me. Every phone call, every family gathering, every lonely evening. But now, for the first time, I stopped asking why. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. I stopped replaying old conversations in my mind because the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. Some people only value what you do for them. Very few value who you are. That realization hurt, but it also set me free. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Ohio trees outside my kitchen window. Everything felt still, peaceful. I made a cup of coffee and sat at the table where I had spent years paying bills, writing birthday cards, and planning holidays for people I loved. I stared out the window and thought to myself, what do I want the rest of my life to look like? Not my son's life, not my daughter-in-law's life, mine. It was a question I hadn't asked in years, maybe decades. As mothers, we become experts at putting ourselves last. We do it so often that eventually we forget we're allowed to come first sometimes. That morning, I decided something had to change. Not because I wanted revenge. Revenge leaves people trapped in the same pain. I didn't want pain anymore. I wanted peace. A few weeks later, I scheduled an appointment with my attorney. I didn't tell anyone. There was no reason to. The decision belonged to me. For years, my daughter-in-law had been listed in an important role within my estate plans. She knew it. The family knew it. It had simply been assumed that one day she would handle certain responsibilities and decisions. Back then, the choice had seemed logical. I trusted her. I believed she cared. But trust isn't built on titles. It's built on actions, and actions tell the truth when words cannot. Sitting in that office, I reviewed every document carefully, every page, every signature, every decision. The attorney asked if I was sure. I smiled. For the first time in a very long time, I was. Without anger, without bitterness, without drama. I removed her from that role. Then I made arrangements that reflected the people who had consistently shown kindness, respect, and genuine care. People who checked on me without needing something. People who remembered my birthday. People who treated me like a person instead of a responsibility. The changes weren't meant to punish anyone. That was never the goal. The goal was honesty. My future should reflect my reality. And the reality was that relationships are measured by more than family titles. They're measured by love, by effort, by respect. When everything was finalized, I walked out of the office feeling lighter. Not victorious, just lighter. As though I had finally set down a burden I'd been carrying for years. The surprising part came afterward. I expected guilt. I expected doubt. Instead, I felt relief. a deep, peaceful relief, the kind that comes when you stop fighting reality. The months that followed were different. I began focusing on myself again. I joined a local book club. I spent afternoons gardening. I took short trips with friends. I learned that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is feeling unwanted. Solitude is choosing your own company and finding peace there. And slowly, my life became fuller, not because my family changed, because I changed. One afternoon, my son stopped by unexpectedly. We sat together in the living room. For a while, neither of us said much. Then he looked around the house and said something that stayed with me. "You seem happier." I looked at him and smiled. A real smile. Not one of the forced smiles I'd worn for years. Maybe he noticed. Maybe he didn't. But in that moment, I realized something important. My happiness no longer depended on whether others appreciated me. It no longer depended on invitations, phone calls, or approval. It belonged to me, and nobody could take it away. As for my daughter-in-law, I eventually heard that she was surprised by some of the decisions I had made, maybe even hurt. But I wasn't responsible for managing her expectations. Just as she once reminded me that she wasn't my chauffeur, life had reminded me of something equally important. No one is entitled to a place in your future simply because they expect one. Respect matters. Love matters. Presence matters. And when those things disappear, sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is accept the truth and move forward. Today, when I look back on that painful chapter, I don't remember the legal documents. I don't remember the meetings. I don't even remember the exact day everything changed. I remember 4 words spoken at a restaurant table. 4 words that felt cruel at the time. Yet strangely enough, they became a gift. Because they opened my eyes. They forced me to see what I had been avoiding. And they led me towards something I thought I had lost forever. My own peace. Sometimes, the greatest act of strength isn't fighting for a place in someone's life. Sometimes it's quietly creating a life where your value is never questioned. And that's exactly what I finally learned to do.